In this presentation, I will talk about the principles of tooth preparation to receive a restoration. Guys, you should know that we have only 3 principles that we should always carry in our minds during the tooth preparation, which are the biological considerations and the mechanical considerations and the aesthetic considerations. So that you should always think in a mind of a physician respecting the health of the oral tissues, and also you should think in a mind of an engineer respecting the mechanical considerations regarding the retention and integrity of the prosthesis and restoration to the tooth. And finally, you should think in a mind of a dentist respecting the patient's appearance and desire. And you should also know that balance between these factors is of a major importance because, for example, if we prepare the tooth excessively, axially and incisally, for an incisor that is prepared to receive an anterior restoration, and that is to give enough space for the porcelain and then to improve the aesthetics. Okay, in this case you have improved the aesthetics, but you have breached and reduced the mechanical and biological considerations. You have breached the biological considerations by taking too much from the tooth structure and being not conservative, and you have breached the mechanical considerations by taking from the surface area of the tooth that will increase the friction and subsequently the retention of the restoration and prosthesis to the tooth. The first consideration that we will talk about is the biological consideration, and that will include the following 6 categories. The biological considerations that are related to the adjacent teeth, the biological considerations that are related to the adjacent oral soft tissues, and the biological considerations that are related to the dental pulp and to the tooth structure itself and to the periodontium around that tooth structure, and finally the biological considerations that are related to both the tooth structure and adjacent periodontium. The first one of these 6 types of biological considerations are the biological considerations related to the adjacent teeth. Guys, you should never do an injury to an adjacent tooth, because even if you reshaped it and smoothed it, it will not be resistant to caries like the original tooth structure that is full with fluoride. It's superficial layers, they are full of fluoride. So that try to avoid this. You at the beginning you will do it a lot, I promise, but again by practice and when you have some skillfulness you will avoid it. Anyways, at the beginning you should always use a metal matrix band to avoid that, or you should leave an enamel lip or fin, as you can see in picture letter A. On the upper right second premolar distally there is a lip or a fin that will prevent the injury and limit it to the adjacent 6. And in picture letter B we can see also that this lower 6 has a mesial enamel lip or fin adjacent to the lower 5, and that will prevent or limit the injury to that lower 5 or second premolar. The second biological considerations which are related to the adjacent soft tissues of the mouth, and when I say the soft tissues of the mouth I mean the tongue and cheeks, and that is simply prevented by the use of the dental mirrors, saliva ejectors, and the flange saliva ejectors. The third biological considerations are related to the dental pulp. Guys, you should know that the freshly cut dentinal tubules are more susceptible to injurious factors and insulators. And this is the case also for the young pulps, because the young pulps are large and close to the surface of preparation and more susceptible so that to the insulators that I will talk about in a minute. And that case will decrease with age, because with age the pulp will be smaller until almost, let's say, age 50, where the pulp will be bigger again relatively. And when I say bigger again, I mean that the wear that will happen to the tooth structure will make us again closer to the pulp. Okay, so that anyways, you should always know that the young pulps and freshly cut dentinal tubules are more susceptible to insulators that will subsequently affect the dental pulp. These insulators are of three types: the biological insulators, the chemical insulators, and the physical insulators. And when I say biological insulators, I of course mean bacteria, and specifically here the caries, so that always never ever leave any type of caries into your tooth preparation, aiming at an indirect pulp capping procedure. Guys, you should never do indirect capping procedures before the tooth preparation for restorations, because you will not put a risk for that indirect pulp capping procedure to be failed, and subsequently all of your hard work will be dropped and the patient will pay more expenses that he will never want to pay. Anyways, the chemical factors, and when I say the chemical factors I mean the luting agents and the solvents. The luting agents may have some irritation to the pulp if they are acidic. At the first at the beginning, for example, the zinc phosphate cement, which is at the beginning it is acidic, and then after the completion of its reaction and its balancing, making a salt type, so it's not a salt but some kind of balancing in its structure, it will be less acidic. Anyways, but it will affect the pulp. And also the solvents, guys, some dental practitioners use the solvents, which are some materials that are used to clean the preparation before the cementation procedure, but not all the practitioners do that. The final type of insulators, which are the most common insulators, which are the physical insulators, and specifically the heat production. The heat production that is produced during the tooth preparation, and that will depend on the type of the burr. If it is a diamond burr or a carbide burr, it will depend on the shape of the burr, if it is big, if it is small, and on the newness of the bear, if it is new or it is old bear, it is an old bear. And also it will depend on the pressure that will be applied by you and the speed of the burr. Of course, all of these things will increase the heat production during the tooth preparation. Uh, this heat production must be prevented by the light and intermittent touches during the preparation and the use of a water cooling systems, not air cooling systems, because the water cooling systems will not only cool it down, but it will also clean it up, and it will also prevent its desiccation, which may lead to a further irritation to the pulp if we use a if we use an air cooling system. So that these are the biological, chemical, and physical insulators that may be an insulators to the pulp during the tooth preparation, and that we should consider during our tooth preparation, or else you will burn the pulp, leading to pulpitis and pain to the patient. Okay. The fourth factors, which are the biological considerations related to the tooth structure itself. Guys, you should be conservative. You should always be conservative into your tooth preparation, whether to receive a filling or to receive a restoration. And that is by the use of partial cover restorations or prostheses when possible, by preparing the tooth occlusally, that preparation should follow the anatomic planes always. For example, here in this picture, you should not do your preparation following the pink lines. No, you should do your preparation following that dotted blue line. Don't make your preparation like a block. Guys, you are not a building worker, you are a dentist, so that you should respect and conserve the tooth structure. And also by less tapering axially. You should always do as less tapering as possible to conserve the tooth structure, and by the proper margin geometry that is conservative to the tooth structure yet compatible with the other aspects of the tooth preparation. For example, here in this picture we can see that number 2 is a shoulder finishing line or margin geometry that is not very conservative to the tooth structure, but number 1 is a chamfer finishing line or margin design that is conservative to the tooth structure. And by always avoiding unnecessary apical extension and making the preparation supragingivally. But you can not to be conservative in some situations. For example, when you have an over-erupted tooth, don't be conservative, because the balanced occlusion and the occlusal rehabilitation procedure is way much more important than the conservation of a tooth structure in this situation. So that always be conservative, but sometimes do not be conservative when there are some things that are more important than the conservation of the tooth structure. And the fifth factors that we should put in our minds are the biological considerations related to the periodontium. We should respect the periodontium, which is one of the most common problems that the patients with restorations and prostheses face. Guys, that is very important by respecting the original tooth contours. And when I say by respecting the original tooth contours, because as we can see in picture A, that the gingiva is swollen, and that is because the teeth are over contoured. In picture B, the restorations were removed and the teeth were recontoured, and in picture C we can see that the gingiva is not swollen and in a healthy condition without any periodontal disease, and that is because the teeth are contoured in a very good manner and not over contoured. Why? Because the over contoured teeth will have some undercut areas and will act like a plaque retention areas and subsequently lead to periodontal disease. Also in the lower two pictures we can see, and also always remember to concentrate on the preparation of the buccal and lingual grooves areas. Guys, these areas must be prepared and reduced more than the other two areas of the lingual or the buccal aspects of the tooth. And because if we, let's imagine, we will not do the preparation deeper in these areas, and so that the restoration will be over contoured in these areas, that over contoured area will act like an undercut that will retain plaque in these areas, and of course will lead to a periodontal disease in these areas, which are the furcation areas, which are very susceptible to periodontal diseases. So that you should always respect the original tooth contours and not to over contour the teeth and subsequently make a plaque retention areas and subsequently lead to a periodontal disease. This case must always be specifically considered in the anterior teeth, where you should not over contour the teeth or under contour the teeth, because the excessively under contoured teeth will not be very aesthetic. Okay, and the space of the interdental papilla also must be respected too. Finally, the sixth factors that are considered biologically, which are the biological considerations related to both the periodontium and the tooth structure. In this case, I mean the margin geometry or the finishing line. This thing has two aspects: the margin placement and the margin design. The margin placement, guys, you should always put the margin supragingivally, and that is for a better aesthetic. You should always put the margin supragingivally, and that is for the easier work and healthier consequences for the restoration and the patient. But you may put it subgingivally in special cases, for example, when there are some aesthetic needs, when the patient have, for example, a high lip line or a high smiling line that shows the cervical part of the restoration. In this case, we may put a subgingival finishing line or margin, or when the tooth is distracted. In this case, what you can do, you should do a subgingival margin in this case, because the tooth itself is distracted and you have no other way, any other way than making a subgingival margin. The third case, for example, when we have a contact area that is below the crest of the free gingival margin, this case will also necessitates the use of a subgingival margin. The last case, in which we have some root sensitivity that is not treated by that cannot be treated by the dental bonding agents anymore. This fourth case is also maybe an indicator to use the subgingival margins, so that always make the margins supragingivally. But if we have some aesthetic considerations or a distracted tooth or low contact areas or some root sensitivity, you may use the subgingival margins. These margins should always be smooth and should always lead to a better, as much good fitting of the restoration as possible to prevent the plaque accumulation and periodontal diseases. Also, it should be away from the contact of the occlusal contacts by 1 to 1.5 millimeters at least, and that is the case in the partial coverage restorations, where the margin is placed axially and occlusally. The other part of the margin geometry is the margin design. Guys, we have three categories of the margin designs: the A and B, which are the feather edge margin and the chisel edge margin respectively. We have the C, D, and E, which are the D and E, which are the chamfer and beveled margin geometries. And finally we have the F, I have done a mistake, C and D, which are the chamfer and the beveled margin designs or geometries. We have the E, F, and G, which are the shoulder, sloped shoulder, and beveled shoulder margin geometries or designs respectively. The first group, A and B, are not used anymore these days, only in specific cases. For example, the laminate, veneer, porcelain restorations, or stainless steel crowns for the pediatric patients, or for example the tilted teeth, but they are not used very much. The C and D, which are the chamfer and beveled finishing lines, are used with the metal restorations and the metal part of the metal ceramic restorations. The E, F, and G, which are the shoulder, the sloped shoulder, and the beveled shoulder margin designs or geometries, are used with the ceramic restorations or the ceramic part of the metal ceramic restorations. And I will talk about in more details about these margin designs in another video. Thank you for improving yourself by listening to this presentation. Always try to be kind to others, always try to know, spread knowledge, and construct the world, and that is for the greatest benefit to the humankind.